Child Welfare Virtual Expo 2017. Session title, Safety Decision Making, Using Protective Capacities and Protective Factors.
Welcome everybody back. We hope you enjoyed exploring the virtual exhibit hall. And it's a quick reminder, if you can see us but you can't hear us, please turn up the speakers on your computer. And if you're having any further difficulties, get in touch with the Help Center. My name is Nilofer Hassan, and I'm the lead for Knowledge and Policy at CANTASD, the Child Abuse and Neglect Technical Assistance and Strategic Dissemination Center, which is a project of the Children's Bureau. And I'm really excited to be part of this conversation today on safety decision-making using protective capacities and protective factors. Prior to coming to CANTASD, I spent 14 years at the Center for the Study of Social Policy, where I coordinated our Strengthening Families work. So it's very exciting for me to be in conversation with states who are using the protective factors framework in their child welfare work.
The Child Welfare Virtual Expo 2017 logo and the Twitter handle, #CWVE.
Teresa?
Yes, and I'm Teresa Costello. I'm the Executive Director of Action for Child Protection. I served as the subject matter expert on the development of the infographic on protective capacities and protective factors. And my particular expertise is on the protective capacities that was developed by Action as part of a comprehensive safety decision-making framework. And since that time, the protective capacities have been used by a number of jurisdictions using many different safety decision-making models. We are very fortunate today to have state participants on our panel, and they will each speak to their use of these frameworks. So I'd like to, beginning with Amanda, ask you to introduce yourselves.
Good morning, I'm Amanda Elliott. I'm the manager of SWAG Family Resource Center for Partnership for Strong Families, which was one of the community-based care agencies in the state of Florida. And the resource center that I manage is in Gainesville, Florida. I really look forward to sharing my experience and work with you about using protective factors in prevention.
Good morning, my name is Christine Weems. I'm a Family Services Specialist for the Florida Department of Children and Families. I've got 25 years in child protective investigation experience, and I'm excited and thrilled to be here to talk to you about the innovations that Florida has done for protective capacities.
And I am Sarah Hauser. I am the Child Protective Services Program Administrator for the State of Utah's Division of Child and Family Services. Also excited to talk to you today about what Utah is doing.
Nilofer continues.
Wonderful. And our conversation today, I think, is really going to be cutting edge, because we know that there are multiple ways people are using protective factors in the field, multiple frameworks that they're utilizing, multiple ways that they're using protective capacities. But where we see the edge of the conversation that we're really excited to engage with you all in is really around how can we use these two frameworks together, and how do we really think about protective factors and protective capacities not as two different things, but as part of the continuum of our work with families. So we've just put up a slide which shows on the right-hand side the infographic that was developed by the Center for States, Teresa mentioned it, on protective capacities and protective factors, the common ground for protecting children and strengthening families. I want to encourage everybody who's in the audience to go download this resource. It should be in your virtual expo resources in the exhibit hall, and upload it to your briefcase, because it really presents the foundation of our conversation today about protective factors and protective capacities and how we use them together. So a few things that we want you to remember about these two frameworks. One is that they're both strengths-based approaches, and we think this is really important in a field that focuses on risk, that often focuses on what's wrong with families, that both of these frameworks give a positive strength-based way to understand what's going on in families' lives. The other thing that we think it's important for you to know is that they provide both distinct and complementary information. So when we say that they can be used together, that is because they're giving you slightly different takes and cuts on what's going on in families' lives. And that between them, they really give you a sense of the ecology around families. So the protective capacities really help you have an understanding of some of the individual things that are going on at the individual level for parents. And the protective factors really look not only at that individual level of what's happening with the parents, but then also the relational level, what's going on at the family level, and what's going on at the community level. So we're going to switch slides really quickly, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about what protective factors are. So protective factors are attributes or conditions that are associated with promoting well-being and reducing risk of negative outcomes at the individual level, at the family level, at the community level, and even at the society level. Again, to underline the point, we know that there are multiple protective factors frameworks being used in the field. The work that I did with Strengthening Families, we had we used the top 5 protective factors on the list that is shown on this slide. So parental resilience, which is really about how families respond and bounce back and maybe even bounce forward from a crisis. Social connections, which is not just about the number of individuals and others that parents are connected to, but also the quality of those connections. The idea of, are they positive? Do they provide instrumental and supports for families? Knowledge of parenting and child development, which is what information do families have about parenting, about how their child is developing, but also what are the skills and tools they have to collect information and find out and learn more when things are going on. Concrete supports in times of need, and I know, Amanda, you're going to talk a lot about this, but is really about the supports that families can draw upon when things get when things get stressful in their lives, and also the tools and skills they have to responding to stressful circumstances and problem solving and connecting to resources. And then the last protective factor that's used in the Strengthening Families framework is the social and emotional competence of children, which is the beginning, the foundational skills that children have in communicating and self-regulating and building their engagement in the world. Many states are using a 6th protective factor that is in the Prevention Resource Guide that is put out by the Administration for Children and Families every other year, and that includes nurturing and attachment, which is the quality of the relationship with families. But I want to underline for folks that there is a 3rd protective factors framework that it was developed with funding from the Administration for Children, Youth, and Families by the Developmental Service Group, and really looks at the protective factors for at-risk children, and has a broader range of protective factors that they are looking at across society and community levels. But regardless of what framework we are using, I think the conversation today is going to be really helpful, because the frameworks, though it sounds very different, have a lot of commonalities. First, they're all strengths-based frameworks. Second of all, they're really research-informed, that they're developed by doing these meta-analysis, looking across lots of different research studies to really try to sort of synthesize out what are the strengths that can be reliably seen to be associated with positive outcomes for families. And when you look across these frameworks, even though the way different researchers have talked about protective factors might use slightly different language, what we see is a lot of consistency in terms of the types of attributes that families have. So, so let's move to our reflection question. And we want to look at what is one way that you could start to apply protective factors in your child welfare casework and safety planning. And I'm going to ask everybody in our audience, those of you who are already using protective factors in your work with families, and for those who are just being introduced to some of these concepts, to respond to our poll question here. So we've got 5 response categories. One is protective factors help to give you build a better understanding of family strengths. B, that they serve as a platform for relationship building with families. C, that they can help you to identify family capacities that can directly inform safety and case outcomes. D, that there's another way that you are using or can think of using protective factors that is different from the list we just gave above. And E, none of the above, which, for some of you, perhaps you don't see how protective factors are relevant to your casework or your assessment yet. So I want to ask everybody to fill out the poll question right now. And hopefully, as we get to the end of our session today, you can reflect back on how you responded to this session. Because I know as we move forward, we're going to hear from Amanda, we're going to hear from Christine, we're going to hear from Sarah, and they're going to be bringing up some of those examples of how they're using it in their work that connects to, I think, all of the examples here. So, I am going to pause for a second to allow everybody, again, give you one last reminder to fill out your poll questions. And then I'm going to turn to our folks in the information booth there and ask them to start pulling the poll to a close and giving us some of our responses. In the meantime, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the work that we've done at the state level and how we've seen states use protective factors. I know, Sarah, you're going to talk a lot about how you've integrated strengthening families' protective factors into your assessment process. And we've worked with a number of states on that. We have a number of states who use protective factors as part of parent cafes or peer-based conversations around how peer-based conversations between parents about how protective factors can make an impact in their lives. And then, of course, we've got a lot of states using it in their training for frontline workers so that it becomes a lens for the frontline interaction with families. So looks like our poll results are up. So our first response, building a better understanding of family strengths, we have about 31% of the audience members said that that's how they see protective factors being used. Our option number B, serving as a platform for relationship building with families. 13% saw that this was really a platform for their relationship building. Then C, identifying family capacities that can directly inform safety and case outcomes, 53%. So that was really where the majority of folks really saw protective factors providing a place to start. And then D, good to know that that only 3% didn't see these primary responses as the way that they would start, and 0%, very pleased to hear that, nobody thought that none of the above, the protective factors, don't seem relevant. So I'm going to turn it over to Teresa to talk about protective capacities.
Thank you, Niloufar. Let me begin by first stressing that the underlying focus of our presentation here is to show how these complementary frameworks can improve assessment and decision making. And if you think about the traditionally in the field of child welfare, we have thought about prevention existing on a continuum from early primary prevention all the way through to intervention in child welfare. And what we want to do in thinking about the relationship between the frameworks is to think about this idea of sequencing and scaffolding. And so we have a slide that represents the way we think about that. And we start with the understanding that in every child welfare case, we must assess for safety. That's our most important number one urgent decision. And so beginning with that decision about safety, we're obviously assessing for threats in families. We're understanding the vulnerability of children to those threats. And importantly, we're factoring in an assessment of protective capacities. That understanding of protective capacities helps us to understand our capacity to build a safety plan with the family, our need for outside intervention if we determine we don't have sufficient capacity. So the sequencing and scaffolding represents the way in which we move from that safety decision to a safety plan. And then above that, we have the idea of the protective factors that reflect for us the overall resilience and capacity that a family has that's built upon their network of community supports, their internal capacity in addition to their family and community supports. So we see these frameworks as being complementary and as being really not existing on a traditional kind of continuum, but working back and forth, because many of the families that come to the attention of our systems go back and forth between the prevention community and the intervention system. So I think that's the first important thing. Now I'm going to take a little bit of a deeper dive into the concept of protective capacities. And thinking about this, when we define protective capacities, we define those as characteristics that are directly related to keeping children safe. And it's very important to distinguish the protective capacities are at the caregiver level, at the parent, the person that is providing the care to the child. And these are the characteristics that ensure on a daily basis that the child is safe. And one of the things that I think is important is to make this is an everyday functioning kind of a thing that we're thinking about here. And sometimes as professionals, we use labels. In fact, it's sort of buzzwords that we use, that we characterize families, and we say protective capacities, behavioral, cognitive. But really what we're talking about is the things that you do. If you're a parent, currently you've been a parent, you've raised children, it's those things you do on a daily basis to protect your child. That's what protective capacities are. We've framed these in three different categories. The first is behavioral protective capacity, and that's about the action. That's about doing. That's about being assertive. It's about having energy, taking action to protect your child in all circumstances. The second category is cognitive protective capacity, and if you think logically, that makes sense. It's the thinking capacity. It's about planning. It's about having a good reality orientation. It's about having adequate knowledge about your child's developmental needs and strengths. And then the third category is the emotional protective capacity. And emotional protective capacity is all about the heart. It's about feeling, it's about attitudes, it's about identification with your child, all of which results in the ability to act to protect the child and keep the child safe in all situations. So this type of framework, we want to think about how it's used then in the decision-making process for safety. And I think one of the simplest ways to think about this is that every state has a safety assessment decision-making model. The definition that we have right now for unsafe in all jurisdictions is if a child is unsafe, if there's a safety threat that's present and the parent does not have sufficient protective capacity. So right there in the definition, we're bringing together the assessment of the threat and the existence of the protective capacities in the family. So that's the first way that the protective capacity concept and framework is used practically in child welfare. The second way is when we transition from the investigation to an ongoing caseworker who's going to move deeper into working with the family to try to change. So we're moving from a control phase to a change phase with a family. And the protective capacities give us a way of looking deeper into understanding what are the underlying causes, the things that are bringing about the behavior that we're seeing in the caregiver. So just to use a somewhat simplistic example, but the idea that say the CPS investigator has assessed a family, and maybe we have a young mother who's using meth on a regular basis. She has a child who's vulnerable. She's maybe using her resources to purchase drugs rather than food for the child. She's not paying close attention to the child's daily needs in terms of supervision and care. Those could come to us as sort of symptomatic of the concerns in the family. At the deeper level, when we get into understanding the protective capacities and figuring out what the treatment focus is, we might come to understand about this mom's impulse control or lack of that and how we might need to address that. We might want to look at how she makes decisions about meeting her needs versus meeting the needs of her child. we want to look deeper at what is her cognitive understanding of the child's developmental needs, and how is she able to change that as this child grows and has different developmental needs. So that taking that deeper dive gives us a focus on the areas we want to work on changing. So we've identified protective capacities to help us control through the safety plan, and then also moving into helping us to identify the change needs related to the case plan. So the framework works very well across the Child Protective Services system. So what I'd like to do now is ask again for a reflection question, a polling question. And the question here is, choose one strategy that you heard today that you will immediately apply to your practice. And we have several choices for you here. Consider how to integrate an assessment of protective capacities into the safety model used in my jurisdiction. I will explore how a protective factors framework could be used with families as a way to discuss needs in a strength-based way. And the third choice is I will consider methods to educate CPS and preventive staff on the framework used by other segments of the system so that there is a greater understanding by both. So we'd like to ask you to go ahead and indicate the response that you think is closest to what you might think about implementing. Also, we know that there could be other choices. You may be thinking about other options about how you might implement this, and we would love to hear those in the chat session that will follow this panel. We'd love to hear those ideas if they are different than the ones that we've presented. But in the meantime, if you can make a selection. Also encourage you to just take advantage of the resources that are available through this virtual expo. You can go to find resources through our session, and you can also find general resources. There's some detailed information related to protective capacities and protective factors. You can download that information to your virtual briefcase, and you can take that with you. So I think we're going to give you about 10 seconds to finish your selection on one of these choices, and we'll go ahead and close out the poll, and let's see what kind of results we got on this. I can see our choices are coming in. We really appreciate everybody making the selections and thinking about how this might apply. It's always good when you listen to something that you walk away with something and you say, this is something I can really use. I'm going to try to apply this in my practice. So we're excited to see what some of the feedback is. So it looks like we have our results. Consider methods to educate CPS and prevention staff on the framework at 70%. Explore how a protective factors framework could be used at 53%, so both pretty high responses there. And about 18% of you said consider how to integrate an assessment of protective capacities. So thinking about both segments of the prevention and the intervention framework. So we really appreciate your response on those questions. And now we have the opportunity to look at a jurisdiction that's bringing both of these frameworks together in a really exciting way. And so we're going to start with Amanda, and she's going to tell us how Florida is using both of these frameworks in a very complementary fashion.
Sure. Thanks, Teresa. So in the state of Florida, child welfare services, with the exception of the child investigation, is privatized to community-based care organizations that serve different geographical regions across the state. And so I represent Partnership for Strong Families, who's one of those community-based care agencies. We serve 13 counties across north central Florida, which includes Gainesville, which is the largest city in the geographical area. And in a moment, you're going to hear from Christine, who represents the Florida Department of Children and Families, serving the same area. Christine and I previously worked together in a more direct way when I used to work for the state as an investigator. And it was during that time that the state of Florida was really looking at the number of children who were in out-of-home care. And locally, we started looking to see if there were any trends that could help inform our practice. And what we discovered is that there were some hot spots in Gainesville, some zip codes, where there was a higher rate of maltreatment and removal. And so there was a conversation about how do we make a positive impact in the community and help move towards better outcomes for families and children. And the idea was born between the Department of Children and Families, Partnership for Strong Families, KC Family Programs, and our library district to create a resource center that was co-located in a library branch located right in a community that was in one of the hotspots that had a high rate of verified maltreatment and removal. And doing so really allowed accessible services in an open, non-judgmental, non-stigmatizing place. And so Partnership now operates 3 resource centers located in Gainesville and another resource center located in Chiefland, which is a rural area. And all of our resource centers are, again, located in those at-risk communities with high rates of maltreatment and removal. I do want to note that the resource centers are a little different than some other child welfare prevention, and that is because people can come into the resource center without having any formal involvement in child welfare. However, we know that a lot of the families that we serve at the resource center and also informal child welfare are the same families, and that they may move in and out of those different systems. Each center offers support and preventative services that relate to one of the specific protective factors, and they're tailored to the community that the resource center serves. And we recognize these protective factors as an extension of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So the slide shows the protective factors aligned with Maslow's pyramid. We know that Maslow believed that motivation is facilitated by meeting one's needs in a hierarchical fashion, and also moving, you can move up levels. You can't move up levels unless your basic needs are met. And so our resource center model meets individuals, families, communities where they're at, and believes that they're the experts in their own lives, and provides culturally appropriate services and resources so that they can achieve higher levels. So the concrete supports address basic physiological needs for survival, and the services include clothing closets, food pantries, access to computers and phones and Wi-Fi. Safety involves the ability for parents to provide an environment where their children can learn and grow. And some examples of that include early learning, access to parenting groups and information, and resource center staff modeling developmentally appropriate interactions and expectations. And then above that, in the pyramid, love and belonging connects with nurturing and attachment, and developing bonds within the family that provide support from within the home. And often we use family enrichment activities at the resource center as an opportunity to promote, support, and develop those emotional ties and positive interactions. The 4th level identifies esteem, so where a family member or family members have developed confidence, connections, to pursue their interests and enhance their development. And we encourage that esteem and those connections by hosting community events that focus on developing both those formal and informal relationships that are sincere and meaningful. And then finally, at the top of the pyramid is self-actualization, which provides for optimal family functioning and resiliency, because we've built upon those lower levels and have built upon existing skills and assets. Allows for creativity and problem solving, which is something that we all do when we're faced with crisis and difficult situations. I like to think of family functioning resiliency sort of as the ultimate goal, and I think of it sort of as a little train track. And if something happens, that you're on your track and you have the resources, the skills, and the tools to be able to address whatever that crisis or problem is, but it doesn't take you off your track. So utilizing the protective factors allows us to both assess where the family is at and what their needs are, and to also help us talk to them about their needs in a very strength-based way, and give them information, education about these protective factors that can be really empowering. Oftentimes, individuals and families don't always recognize their strengths. And unfortunately, there are families who haven't had a positive interaction with our systems. And so using the protective factors framework and strength-based language can really help to change that, to help them feel heard, and to create maybe the first positive experience that they've had. So I want to take a moment just to explain what this looks like on the Resource Center level. Someone would come in to the Resource Center and identify a specific reason that they came in. About 50% of the services that we provide are concrete supports, but we use that as an opportunity to not just simply provide whatever that concrete need is. We want to develop a relationship. And so what that looks like is finding out the need and then asking the individual or the family, what led to this specific crisis or problem? Is there anything that we can do to help you resolve not only this concrete need, but that issue? And then what are you looking forward to? What are your goals, and how can we help you achieve those, either by providing you services and programs are here, or that how can we link you to the resources that exist out into the community? And so while protective factors are being used in the prevention work being done in Florida, protective capacities are being used on the front end safety work in child welfare. And Christine will speak to that.
Thank you, Amanda. Historically, Florida had previously done their investigations by incident-driven, fact-driven. It was basically, did this incident occur? If it did, then we just focused on the negative. We focused on what the family wasn't doing. So it wasn't a very positive interaction for them with the Department of Children and Families. And a lot of the times it was the mom that got the brunt of it. She may have not been the alleged perpetrator in the case, but because we thought of her as the primary caregiver, she was the one that we dealt with the most, and that it took a lot of the negativity. Now that we've gone to the safety methodology and focusing on protective caregiver capacities, we're focusing on what their strengths are and what their needs are. But we do try to stress a lot of the strengths and bring those out in the families, and then discuss the needs. Find out if there are extenuating circumstances. Find out if there's family outside resources that can help this family strengthen those needs, enhance those needs. And if the children are safe within the home, we can leave them there and we can work on the diversion piece, or if it has to go to ongoing supervision, we do it that way. But a lot of times our families are now a lot more positive with our interactions. They're saying that we're asking them a lot more questions on what they think, how they feel, what they feel is best for their families, and how they can better prepare themselves to do what they need to keep their kids safe. So there's a lot more positive interaction with our families. Our families are a lot more interactive with us and appreciative of the things that we do for them. It also has refined the engagement skills the PIs have with our families, because they're having to ask a lot more questions. They're having to delve a lot more into the families and get to know these families a lot more, instead of just looking at what the incident was. And combined with all that, these frameworks have helped us working with our families and been very positive.
It's very exciting to see how each of these frameworks is in place in Florida and promoting a strength-based approach. And now we're going to hear from our last panelist, Sarah Hauser in the state of Utah, who is going to talk about something that is very dear to my heart, which is work that I actually did years ago with the state of Utah on integrating the protective factors into your assessments and your in-home work with families. Sarah?
Hi, thanks, Nilofer. Just to lay the foundation, Utah is a state administered system, and so all of our programs are operated statewide. We began our 4E waiver project in 2013 under a program that we call HomeWorks, and HomeWorks is our enhanced in-home services program. We wanted to beef up and bolster that in-home program, because the goal of HomeWorks is to really reduce the need for foster care by putting parents in a better position to safely care for and nurture their own children. And to accomplish that goal, we looked at what strategies might be the best, and so we looked to the protective factors framework as a way to improve our assessment of families, to get a better understanding of how families are functioning overall, and again to use the opportunity to strengthen families with every client contact. So we use the protective factors throughout the system, so every case level is actually using them as part of the assessment. So for example, with our investigative level, those first interactions our CPS workers were also very incident driven, very allegation driven, focused really on did this happen or did it not. And now we've tried to take them out of that to explain that, why the allegation occurred is far more valuable for us to know. That if you, for instance, have an incident of non-supervision, why did the non-supervision occur, instead of just saying, well, it's non-supervision, clearly they need some sort of parenting class, and then just move them on their way. It's getting a better sense of, was this non-supervision as a result of a parent needing to get to work and feeling desperate, feeling like they didn't have an option. They had to leave their child alone or they would have lost their job, and that could have been catastrophic. Versus the parent who says to us, they're two. I really don't understand why we're having this conversation. They're fine. They can supervise themselves, which is clearly a knowledge of parenting and child development issue. Or was it a situation where the parent is actually actively using drugs and isn't available for the child or to meet the needs of the child, and is that a result of a lack of resilience, that they are using ineffective coping strategies? So again, that lack of social connections or concrete supports, or knowledge of parent and child development, or parental resilience can really play into why something happened and help us better target our interventions to help our CPS staff make better decisions about which cases need ongoing agency intervention and at what level of intensity. So once that decision is made and the cases get passed along, all of our cases require an assessment to be completed. It is a CANS-based assessment, which is a child and adolescent needs and strengths assessment. And it was actually developed in collaboration with the Parade Foundation to specifically incorporate the protective factors as part of that assessment. So people are getting a better understanding, again, of what the client's specific needs are. And again, that strength-based approach, that we're not just focused on what's going wrong or what's not going well, but we're also looking at what's going well and how can that be used to enhance their progress throughout our system. So in addition to the protective factors, we have been using protective capacities for a long time as part of that safety assessment and safety planning process, which we also bolstered as we kind of moved along with this Homeworks project. But because safety is that primary decision that needs to be made, it was very important for us to know our staff are doing that in the best way possible. And so by using the protective capacities and protective factors in conjunction with one another, we feel like we now have a much more comprehensive assessment process.
Nilofer.
That's terrific. So now we get into the exciting part of our conversation, which is when we get to be in dialogue about what does it really mean? What is it, sort of now that you've sort of laid the context of what it looks like in your state, let's get into some of the hard questions about how we use these together. And I'm going to start with just something at the very beginning, which is, how do you think the knowledge and understanding of your state's safety assessment could really help impact repeat maltreatment in your state? And I want to, ask you, Teresa, to go first. And
Sure. When I think about repeat maltreatment, that's the bottom line, right? The reason why we're intervening with families is because we want to prevent future harm. And every state, is making safety decisions. We've got to be confident that the safety assessment model is guiding decision making so that the safety plans that are being created are realistic. Mm-hmm. And a key part of that decision making is understanding protective capacity. A parent that has sufficient protective capacity and can participate in a realistic way, be sufficient in a safety plan, is important to understand. And so for me, it's knowing how to make good safety plans, incorporating information about protective capacity, so we're setting families up to be successful and not to fail or have a safety plan that doesn't work.
Terrific. Amanda, can you take this question on for Florida?
Sure. So while we know that protective capacities are specific to caregivers, protective factors can impact individuals, families, and communities. And so we really believe that strong communities make strong families, and vice versa. And so last year alone, the Resource Center had over 32,000, the combined Resource Centers had over 32,000 visits.
Wow. And
provided over 43,000 unique services. And we know that the data from 2009 to 2015 shows a decrease of 44 to 58% in the verified maltreatment in the communities that each Resource Center serves. So we're confident that what we're doing is making a positive impact in the community, and we're really excited to be able to share that with everyone.
Terrific. And Sarah, can you talk a little bit about this question from Utah's point of view?
Yeah, of course. So in Utah, when we started the Homeworks project, repeat maltreatment was one of our performance measures that we were going to monitor very closely to see how we were doing. And initially, because we were going to be serving families in home, we anticipated a rise in maltreatment to a certain extent, because children we would have normally been removing, we'd now be serving in the home. Mm-hmm. But I'm actually very happy and excited to report that since 2013, in all of our jurisdictions, the numbers have actually stayed the same or decreased. So we've actually seen a decrease in some areas in repeat maltreatment.
That's really exciting to hear. So yeah, and as far as I'm concerned, it really goes back to that graphic that you talked about, Teresa, about the sequencing and the scaffolding, and this idea that if we understand what's in our safety assessments, that helps us understand what we're working towards in terms of our protective capacities and the types of skills that decisions parents need to make in order to keep a child safe. But that when we think, and then we boot back up, and going from that sense of what are the decisions parents need to make to what are the conditions that we need to have within the family and within the community that are going to make it less likely that the type of crisis situation that in which parents have to make safety decisions are going to come up. Yeah. Teresa, you have questions for our panel?
Yeah, so I'd like to pose another reflection question for our panelists. And the question is, how has utilizing protective capacities and protective factors together enhanced your assessments? And I think, Christine, we're going to ask you to give us a reply from Florida.
As I stated previously, we were basically incident focused and focusing on the negative and not the positive, and we were not much help to families in that method. We weren't giving them the appropriate services that they needed to fix whatever the issues were. So with the protective capacity that came about, we now were determining what the root causes of the problems were in order to refer them to the appropriate services and take the appropriate action to help the families. One of the examples that comes to mind is a mother that we had worked with closely. She was using cocaine quite frequently. And every time we would refer her to substance abuse, she would stop for a little while, but then she would start again. So when we went over to the protective capacities, we determined, after talking to her at great length and asking her, why are you doing this? Which she finally said, nobody's ever asked us before. We found out that she was sexually abused as a child by her stepfather and a couple of her uncles. Her direct family knew about it, but never reported it and never got her any treatment. So she had unresolved trauma issues that needed to be resolved, and that was her coping mechanism. Using the cocaine was the way she dealt with it. So we were able to determine this, able to get her into the mental health treatment that she needed to help her with the unresolved trauma, which in turn also able to help her get off of the drugs permanently and to be the parent that she was, because previously she was not acknowledging or realizing what the effect it was having on her children, because she was looking at, they're clothed, they have a home, so there's no problem. But she doesn't realize what her behaviors were doing to her kids too. So that was one of the positive things that the protective capacities has done for us. Also, when we do have to remove children, when previously all the parent had to do was to do the service. They just had to attend. They didn't even have to show that they learned anything. Now they have to show a significant behavior change. Not just the verbiage, but they have to be able to demonstrate that they now know what their actions were doing to their children and themselves. So that has been a really positive outcome for us, and it's helped us a lot.
That's great. So by defining the protective capacities in behavioral terms, you know what you're looking for in families in terms of the change. Yeah, that's awesome. Sarah?
Yeah, so I think Utah has a lot of the same to report that Florida does, and it's exciting and validating to hear other jurisdictions having the same type of success and families having a positive response to that. But looking at those underlying issues, the reasons behind the behavior through that assessment process has been really helpful for us to create more specific plans for families. So instead of the shotgun approach where you're just throwing stuff out and hoping something sticks, or the cookie cutter approach that because it's a certain type of incident, say drug abuse, that the case needs to take a certain track and certain things are always required. It's really getting at the root and the core of why does that behavior exist? Why is it happening? And both frameworks really help us with getting better assessments about that. And then, like I said, creating better plans to better inform our interventions.
Teresa speaks.
Great. Those are such valuable reflections. I really appreciate your thoughts on that. We'd like now to ask our audience to share your thoughts on another question. So this is a reflection question for you, and the question is, what new ideas do you have for working collaboratively with your prevention or child welfare partners? We'd like to ask you to chat your responses, and we can, get a sense of your ideas. You can also look at the answers that are coming in from your colleagues across the country, so you can kind of get a sense of how others are thinking about this. And as you do this and submit your responses, I just wanted to share my thoughts on this, that as we sit here and we hear the ways that Florida and Utah are implementing the frameworks and thinking about the collaborative nature of this, is that we realize that it's so important to understand what your partners are using and how they're approaching families. Because as we've said, families, they come into our system in different places at different times. And our appreciation of each other's approaches is important to be successful with families. So we owe it to families to know what the prevention system or part of our system is using, as well as the intervention system. We don't exist in silos, and it's not best for our families if we operate that way. So Sarah, share your thoughts with us on this question as well.
Yeah, we have put forth a lot of effort to educate our community partners, including our legal partners. We've met with judges, our attorneys, we've met with our contract providers, and many of our key community partners to make sure that they understand the concepts of these frameworks, so that when we are talking about child safety or we're talking about parent functioning, that it's clear exactly what we're talking about and what we're referring to, and that when we're all using the same language, that communication is so much more effective. That when an attorney understands when I'm talking about a child not being safe, and I can clearly articulate where a parent's capacities are lacking, they can understand that more now than they did historically, which I think has really helped us serve families better.
Teresa continues.
That's such an important piece, the connection to the legal side of the system and the court's understanding that, so that we're speaking the same language and we have the same understanding of concepts of safety and protective capacities. I think that's excellent. Amanda, tell us your thoughts on this.
Yeah, so I think there's sort of two different levels of collaboration. There's, you spoke to prevention and intervention being fluid. Mm-hmm. And it's really important to break down what I think traditionally has been silos between prevention and intervention. And that's something that's an ongoing process, and I think we're all continually learning. Just in preparing for the expo, Christine and I were talking about, what information do we each have that we can share And so what we realized is that we're able to pull the protective capacities information from assessments and use that to help inform the protective factors work that's happening at the resource centers in the communities. Additionally, there's a lot of collaboration that happens outside of the formal child welfare system, so across a variety of sectors, including social service agencies, the business sector, nonprofits, local government, community, and residents. The resource centers have over 40 partners, and those partners, and they're from across sectors. They're really key to the sustainability of the resource center and also to the accessibility of services and resources and programs, as everything that's offered at all of the resource centers is free to the patrons, and that's really key to reducing barriers. Additionally, cross-training, which I think someone mentioned, of prevention staff and intervention staff, and even with your partners who may not be specific to child welfare, is really important. All of our resource center managers have previous experience working in some form of front-end child welfare position. And so we have the understanding and knowledge of the model that's being used, and also that language, which is empowering to us to be able to talk to our peers and be able to understand what's going on and share information. It's also really empowering to families to know that the individuals that they're speaking and working with share the same language and are able to educate them about what the informal or formal systems look like. The last thing I want to say is when you're thinking about new ideas to work collaboratively is to think outside the box, think about partners that you may not have otherwise considered, who may not have anything to do with child welfare, because they can bring a lot to the table. And I've just always found that our common goals are so much stronger and bigger when we work together, and they far exceed what any of us could hope to achieve individually.
Teresa continues.
That's great. And Nilofer, you have such extensive experience. Tell us what your thoughts are about this collaborative opportunities.
You know, I am going to ping pong off of your last point, Amanda, because I think this idea, you know, even as we struggle to work better across prevention and child welfare intervention, what we know is it's not just the same families in prevention and child welfare. It's the same families that we're seeing in our mental health systems. It's the same families that we're seeing in our justice systems. It's the same families we're seeing coming into housing, homelessness, domestic violence. And so this idea of having these strength-based frameworks as a way to think consistently across multiple systems with families. So I make a little quick commercial for folks who are going to, after you leave this session, if you're going to go to your virtual expo booth, Capacities, we have a booth here at the virtual expo, and one of the films that we are showing in that booth is something called Unlikely Partnerships. And that's from work that's happening in Washington State, where the Child Welfare Department, the Department of Corrections, and the Department of Early Learning actually are using the protective factors as a consistent framework for work with families to either, who are in justice systems, right, who are either, and to either keep them out of the justice system and out of child welfare, or actually return them home. So it's an interesting way to think about these common frameworks. So I'm recognizing that we are almost out of time. So very, very quickly, I want everybody to give your final reflection quickly about what can frontline workers and supervisors really do? What might be a next step to use these frameworks in your work with families? So Teresa?
For me, I think that the takeaway is these are not mutually exclusive, these frameworks. They work in a complementary fashion. Our work is with the same families, and we can best serve families when we understand that we don't work in silos and that we have an obligation to have a mutual understanding of each other's frameworks.
Amanda speaks.
Yeah, I think the frameworks provide a language that we can use to talk with the individuals and families and communities that we're working with, to talk about the protective factors, to talk about the protective capacities, to help identify and celebrate what they're already really doing well, and then help them identify the needs and encourage them to identify their own needs, so that we're not identifying needs for them. Encourage them to identify their own needs. And then it allows us the opportunity to be a support as those individuals and families sort of make their way up that hierarchical pyramid. And then sort of my last thought is to remember to collaborate with the individuals and families that you work with and the communities that you work with, because their voice and knowledge is very different from the knowledge of professionals or experts. And it brings richer, meaningful information to the table that will make your endeavors just that more successful.
Christine replies.
And as you said, Teresa, the frameworks are interchangeable. They work well together. They need to be done well together, but communication is the key. You've got to be able to communicate with your families, with your resources, and be able to express what the family needs and what's there, and focus on those strengths.
Sarah speaks.
Our system has really tried to focus on caseworkers being interventionists, so rather than service brokers that somebody else can do something for you to improve your lives, that our caseworkers are actually the ones doing that they're doing meaningful interventions, because the protective factors and protective capacities are things that we can improve and increase at a caseworker level, and having our caseworkers be really active in that is important, as well as supervisors. Supervisors are one of the key pieces in the child welfare system. So how do supervisors change the conversations that they're having with their staff? How do they staff cases in more meaningful ways, using the protective factors, using the protective capacities, to get a better understanding of what their staff are doing and how to best support them, support families.
Nilofer.
Terrific. And I'm gonna end by sort of giving a challenge to everybody in their audience. I want to ask you to start with yourself. Right, and I'm going to quote some very smart people here. So I believe that it was either Amanda or Christine who told us that these frameworks are about everyday functioning. And I want to underline the fact that that's universal. So start with yourself and try to apply these frameworks to your own life, because I think that's a very important part of really recognizing that we all need these things. And then I want to challenge people to apply it to families in their casework, because I think it was actually Sarah who told us that we can use these frameworks to strengthen families with every client contact. And it is really by applying it in the casework and using it as a coaching and a mentoring framework for your everyday engagement with families that's going to make a difference. And I believe it was Christine who told us that the other thing these frameworks help us do is get to the root causes. And so really using them to work backward to think, what are the root causes of the issues for these families? And how do I make sure that I'm addressing the root cause and not just what's presenting right now? So I think that's really important. And I think we're almost at the end.
Teresa.
We are almost out, and I just like to, following the challenge that Nilofer's given, is we know that in the audience you are using these frameworks in various ways and different ways than what you've heard here. And so in the chat that follows, we would love to hear your application of these frameworks. So as we come to an end, I'd like to thank our panelists for your rich presentations, your investment in sharing your experience, and your commitment to this field and the work. It's really evident in your presentations. I'd like to thank our audience, obviously, thank the Children's Bureau, the Capacity Building Center for the opportunity to be part of this panel. And I'm going to let Nilofer give some closing comments.
Sure. So I also want to thank all of our panelists and thank everybody in the audience for joining this session. We want to encourage you have a feedback form. We want to ask you to complete your evaluation immediately as this session ends. And you will be moved immediately from the end of this session into our chat session. So we're hoping that you'll stay with us for the next half hour, that we, as Teresa said, idea that we get to hear from you about your responses, your experiences, and your continuing questions. But also join us at the Center for States booth in the exhibit hall to chat with us, and then drop by the Innovations in Child Welfare exhibit booth at 1 o'clock for our virtual chat session. And then finally at 1:30, please join us again, or not join our group, but join the next panel, which will be the next the skills seminar for frontline workers on the full view, comprehensive assessment of parents. And again, thank you all, and thank you to the Center for the States for this wonderful opportunity.